Yahweh Scanos Wegwego. My name is Ansley Jemison. This is the Original People's Podcast, the Ungwehui Podcast. So that's my usual start for these types of events when I'm doing the podcast. And since I'm speaking about podcasting and digital media, I guess it was appropriate to do my opening there. So first and foremost, I wanted to thank the Onosogwandate staff for having me back for a second time. I had the opportunity to come down and speak last year, and it was really inspiring, and I was very grateful for the opportunity to speak to community members, some family members, and just kind of reconnect with some folks. So it was really nice to be back here. And I have to say that shout out to Hayden and all his staff as well. The museum, the cultural center here is really coming together. Some outstanding exhibits, so if people get a chance to come and check out the Onosogwandate, come see it. I think there's a lot of rich information that's here, great history, great cultural information, and I think it's great for people to understand, more about who we are as a people, and this is a great visual representation. It's a beautiful space, very well lit. I think there's some really interesting information that's being shared here. And, myself working at Ganondagan State Historic Site and doing the work that I'm doing up there as the cultural liaison, this is a great sister organization for us. And I think there's a lot of great sort of cross-cultural, opportunities for us to be able to share and help each other out. And just really share our messaging, really, more than anything. And, really that's a lot of what I am probably going to speak about tonight. I think that the thing that I'm really probably the most proud of in terms of the podcast is the opportunity to talk about our people, talk about indigenous people, talk about Onondaga people, talk about Haudenosaunee people, Ungwehuis, talk about us in contemporary times, talk about us in a contemporary context as opposed to something that's just constantly relegated to a history book. And the only time we become contemporary in a lot of people's eyes, in Western New York and in this area is, when we have issues, when we have challenges and problems and things like that are going on. And I think there's a lot more to our people. I think there's a lot more to our culture that's positive, that are good things that are out there that I think that really deserve an opportunity to, hear and share more of those stories. In a past life, I worked with the Iroquois Nationals back when, I was the executive director there. And I was afforded an opportunity to meet a lot of different people and get to travel and was able to go to a lot of different places. And one of the things that, really became relevant and important, I think, in my experience with that was the opportunity to travel to other indigenous people's territories. And to be able to do, something that is a part of our traditional practices and something that was, done and has kind of gone a little bit by the wayside is the edge of the woods, and having the opportunity to do a traditional greeting with somebody and to actually meet with people and meet on our terms, and oftentimes when you go to universities or, corporations or different places around, there's now this sort of trend around doing the land acknowledgements and things like that. And I've been kind of pushing back against the land acknowledgements in a lot of ways, just because I don't feel as though they're honoring in a lot of ways. I feel as though they're kind of doing more harm than good at times. I think it's a great conversation starter, but if there's no meat behind that and there's no opportunity to kind of have dialogue around the significance of displacement or maybe sort of land theft and things like that, then what are we all doing? It's like, yeah, we took your stuff and we're not going to do much about it, but we just want to acknowledge the fact that we're now here and there it is. And so some of the work that I've been doing at Ganondagan, and it was in place prior to my arrival there, but it was really important, I thought, to rekindle the idea around the edge of the woods. And essentially what it would be and what that is, when somebody would come and have an audience with a village or a community or something like that, rather than coming up and knocking on the door and kind of, obliging themselves to the community, they would set up a fire at the edge of the woods and they would let people know that, we want to have an audience with you all, we want to speak with you all. And, so we would have a process and there's sort of a protocol around that. And I think it's important to kind of look back at those types of things and really think about what it means to have a traditional greeting or some sort of a greeting with people and have reciprocity involved and kind of seeing each other as human beings when we're talking to one another. And oftentimes when I'm doing the podcast, what I'm trying to find is what's important about this person that we're talking to? What's the interesting piece about this person that we're talking to? And they could be somebody who's just a bead worker or somebody who's a basket maker or somebody who, maybe people don't think are, really important people in a lot of ways or kind of outstanding people in a lot of ways. But really, when you think about the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of information, the learning that went into this person's craft, the ability to know the type of tree that you need to take down, the respect and the reverence for the tree itself and what it's provided in the experience that tree had, and then to take that thing and then to turn it into something beautiful, even more beautiful than was already created there. There's a real beauty in that, and there may be some simplicity into it, when you kind of boil it down in little ways. But then you're also thinking about the person, and what that person does to get themselves in this space. And maybe it's a way of life for them in terms of how they're gonna, make a living for themselves. Maybe it's something they're doing as like a hobby or something like that. But, in a lot of ways, it's something that's culturally relevant. It's important for us. And it's just beautiful to see that people are taking on these roles, taking on these responsibilities to, carry on our culture, carry on our traditions. And so I want to celebrate that and honor that, in a lot of ways. And I think the podcast is a great format for that. You can kind of vary in terms of like the length and the time of that. But also, something that I really appreciate about the podcast, and this kind of ties back into that edge of the woods and the reciprocity piece, is there's nothing like actually sitting in a room with somebody and just spending time. We don't do that as much anymore. I know tonight we're going to do a Zoom, and I'm thankful and grateful for that because maybe more people have the opportunity to, see the presentation and whatever else. But really, for a while when I was doing the podcast early on and starting out, I wanted to kind of reach some broader audiences. I wanted to kind of reach out to some of my friends and folks that I got to know from the West and things like that. And the podcast seemed like a good way to, the Zoom kind of seemed like a good way to do some of that stuff. And also, when I started the podcast, it was in around COVID times, so, trying to be mindful and being careful around the spread of germs and things like that. The Zoom was kind of an easy thing to do. But really what I started to feel was that those podcasts felt a little bit hollow, they didn't really quite feel as that much of a connection, and I don't do a lot of preparation when I go into the podcast. A lot of times I'm just kind of, I've got a general idea of who the person is, what they do, what sort of things they're interested in, and just naturally being nosy or curious and things like that. I just kind of let the conversation go where it's going to go. And I don't want to be too rehearsed or too scripted or anything like that because I'll end up messing it up, I feel. So as much as I can actually be present and in the moment and actually spend time with that person and get to know and understand who they are, and let them really kind of express, a little bit more about who they are, where they're coming from, and what was their process. How did they get to where they are? That's what's been, really the secret sauce, I think, behind some of that. And so I've kind of been all over the map a little bit, I think, in terms of the types of people that I've talked to. I've had, some really great interactions and conversations with people from, our own territories here in the Northeast and around Haudenosaunee territories. I've got some friends that are out west. I had a person that I met, through, just some Facebook interactions and, social media interactions and things like that. And they were doing a skateboard art show called Pivot. And they were showing this at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Excuse me. And I thought it was really amazing. I would love to see something like that. I know it's come to Mohawk territory, but I'd love to be able to see something like that happen, more so across our territories, is using a format and a board, a skateboard, as a place to be able to transmit information, share cultural knowledge and information and things like that. But again, taking it out of like a traditional form of maybe a basket or something like that, but maybe putting it into something more contemporary like a skateboard. Something that can kind of cross, cultures. It's something that could be also like a unifier culturally as well. We're all kind of, people now are skateboarders from all different walks of life and things like that. And also it's just sort of another neat sort of format to be able to kind of do the art and things like that and express the type of work that we do. And really want to challenge our people. It'd be really cool to see like a skateboard made out of like the baskets or something like that, or a weaving or something like that, or how can you incorporate beadwork and things. Having it either be 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional, something like that. But really a big thing for me is just really kind of seeing all of the cool and interesting things that Native and Indigenous people are doing. This afternoon I had an opportunity to speak with Maurice today, and he and I have kind of known each other, kind of back and forth here and there and things like that. Haven't had a lot of real interactions and things, but I knew him growing up as a kid, and now to see him as a man and what he's doing, in terms of like his art and his, interest in sort of like digital art and things like that. He's a great follow on Instagram, so if you get a chance to follow him on Instagram, I'll give him a shout out here. He's got some really cool work that's on there. And, we were geeking out about tech stuff today. And, he and I were talking about it, it's like, there's a lot of really great ideas and stories and information within our culture that we have that just hasn't really been shared in a space or in a format where everybody can kind of access it, in a lot of ways. Oftentimes, if you're going to go to, traditional ceremonies and things like that, or, you're going to learn about different stories and things like that, it could be done in a language. And because of no fault of our own, there's been language loss, and there's sort of that lost in translation sort of issue that sort of tends to happen. And how cool would it be to figure out ways to tell our stories digitally, video-wise, through podcasting, and share that information out to people so that people have more of an understanding as to who we are. And I think that the podcast lends itself that opportunity because of the long format of it all. It takes a little bit of time to kind of unravel some of these stories, get some of this stuff out there. And, you want to get down and sit down with the right people to be able to tell some of these things. And so I've been fortunate, again, having access and being at a place like Ganondagan, or having access to the community, both Cattaraugus, Allegheny, and Tonawanda, and knowing people from those territories and being able to hit them up and ask them questions, And, I think that one of my biggest regrets, having grown up, on territory, was I never really knew what to ask the elders. Everybody's always saying, oh, you gotta spend time with the elders, this and that. Well, I didn't even know what questions I should be asking, and you don't know what you don't know, until you get older and you start traveling a little bit, or, you come across some things and you see something and then somebody asks you about it. Well, what do you guys do in your territory, and you have to kind of shift your weight a little bit and feel uncomfortable about it for a minute. But, once you kind of start to get a feel for things and you start to look around, then you're like, oh yeah, we got a really rich history. We have a really rich culture, and there's a lot of things that like I don't know that I already thought I knew a lot about, but in reality, there's always more you can learn. And so selfishly, I wanted to kind of set out and go and figure out like, well, what don't I know? And now having the gift of just being nosy and the gift of gab, I guess, in a way. Utilizing that to be able to like go and ask those questions, go and find out some of those things. Getting over sort of that funniness around like, asking a question or actually sitting with somebody. It's still a little bit more challenging and difficult, I think, to sit down with some of our elders, because some of them don't want to be recorded, they don't want to be, captured in those ways and things like that. But I really just want to implore to them that, please, sit with us, sit with the young people, let us, capture some of this stuff, let us record it. But it also reminds me of something too that I was listening to on my way down here. And, I was listening to this account and recount, I guess, of the Canandaigua Treaty and when that was signed and how that all came together. And Timothy Pickering was the man who was very instrumental in getting our people, the Haudenosaunee people, to come to Canandaigua in 1794. And he started to put the call out, in 93, and a little bit before that. And imagine that this is following the American Revolution, okay, so a little bit of a history lesson. My eyes roll back in my head as soon as I start hearing history, dates and numbers and things, so I'll try to give you the abridged version and how I kind of deduce some of this stuff so I don't lose you all that are in the room. But following the American Revolution, the United States had won, they chased the British out, right? And so they realized that the Haudenosaunee people were very pivotal and important people that they had to gain as allies because they were still pretty weak. And so the government was pretty poor, they didn't have a lot of resources, they didn't have a lot of things, but they realized that if they didn't make friendships and relations with the Seneca people in particular, but the Haudenosaunee people, that at any given moment, had we sided with another group of people like the Shawnee and things like that, we could have rolled the whole thing and it could have been a much different story today, But that being said, Timothy Pickering was able to get the Haudenosaunee people to come to Canandaigua to talk about a peace treaty. And this treaty was actually sort of this allyship and this idea that they were going to actually one of the very few treaties that actually gives land back to our people, which is pretty amazing. But you have to understand and realize too that treaties can actually be a device, for diplomacy. They could also be a device for dispossession. So they're kind of fraught, and they kind of have sort of they can go either way. They're a little bit wishy-washy. But this was a short treaty. It was only 7 articles that go to it. And Article 3 really kind of speaks to what was going to happen with, Seneca lands and what we were going to have in terms of our resources and our access and things like that. But in thinking about the act of diplomacy and bringing these people together, and you have people, there's a language barrier because you have Haudenosaunee people that are speaking only their language. You have these, the colonizers, the Americans that are here. And then you have this middle group, the Quakers, that are sort of acting as our Indian allies and agents and things like that. And they were the ones that could be essentially the translators, the trusted translators. And so there's a lot of things that kind of go into communication, and I'm kind of falling back on and finally utilizing and accessing my Syracuse communications degree 100 years later. So thank you, Mom, Yahweh, for, encouraging me and getting me through that place. My parents as well, my father. Communication is an important thing, and I think that's, again, why I feel like the podcast has been this interesting sort of format, is to, tell our stories, get, to different places and things like that. And in and around communication, there's so many aspects that kind of go into it. Personalities, people, body language, how do you read a room, how do you pick up on clues and things like that. But then also, how do you use these things so that everybody kind of comes out of the other side of it feeling good, And so the treaties, were really sort of these challenging, sort of articles and pieces of paper that in a lot of ways were used against us. They were horrible, I think, in a lot of ways, but in particular because November 11th, we just celebrated the 229th anniversary of the Canandaigua Treaty. But, at times there were things that were positives about these things. They were the ones that kind of staked the hold, in terms of our sovereignty and establishing our sovereignty. The fact that we still get a piece of annuity cloth, sort of that remembrance and that commemoration from, the government side to it all. And, so there's so many different stories that are kind of laced within how we get to 1794 and now how we're at, 2023 and who we are as a people, and where we're at as a people today. And it's interesting to see how we've all sort of adapted, how we've all sort of hung on and survived. What are the things that still anchor us to our culture? What are the things that still keep us here and why we still claim an indigenous identity? It's a very challenging identity to have. There's not a lot of places where we can go where, we're sort of like a dominant species or the groups that's kind of, the majority or anything like that. And it's oftentimes very difficult, and I remember going into college classes and things like that and being the only, and being in a Native American history course or something like that, and everybody turning around looking at you like you have some sort of answer, or just anything, just right now I know that there was a big mascot issue that just kind of went on here, around keeping the name, the Seneca Warriors and things like that. That was the only representation that you often have of indigenous people in dominant society at times. It's some Indian head on the side of a helmet or something like that. And, I went to a high school, Canandaigua High School, where the Braves was the name of our mascot. And, it was challenging and it was difficult to not jump in on the conversation and try to put my foot in my mouth by saying something and inciting anything, and did I really have anything really to say about it, because I kind of almost looked at it as well that okay, well, if we get rid of the mascot and the imagery and the iconic, like, the idea of that, then it becomes part of that erasure conversation as well. There's no longer this indigenous presence. There's no longer like any kind of a nod to like the indigenous people, even though there's a town called Canandaigua, which is actually one of our words, but you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I think it's the behavior that kind of surrounds these things that becomes sort of the question. How do you control, how do you manage the behavior of people? There was just a picture that's been going around on the internet this last couple of days. There was a little boy at a Kansas City Chiefs game, and the kid's face was painted red on one side, black on the other. And all of the images that were going out were essentially this image of this young man with this war bonnet on and his face painted black. And so everybody's kind of like, blowing up about that, but nobody actually saw the head-on view that the other side of his face was actually red. So who's pissed? Are we all angry about that? African American people because he's in blackface? Is it Native people because he's in redface? And what do we do about these sort of things? And then you have other groups, the indigenous side, there are people that are in support of this. I believe it's an honor. I think it's awesome. I love it, whatever. And we all have to kind of wrestle with these sort of conversations into these issues. And again, I think that a podcast is a place where you can give somebody the opportunity to speak about these sort of things and have the opportunity to really, express what their feelings are, express what it is. And, I was approached by the Canandaigua School District about, the mascot issue and being an alumni and things like that, having been an athlete as well and being a Canandaigua Brave myself. And, the question came to me and, I had to ask them. I said, well, you guys are an institution of higher learning. This is a place where, people come to be educated and things like that. And this is a mandate that's coming down from New York State higher ed. Well, what would you teach your students if this was, on any other sort of context, if this was some other person or some other group that was being targeted? How would you teach this thing? And how would you use this as an educational opportunity? And they really didn't see it as that. They were still kind of welled up with the issue that, like, you're stealing my culture, you're stealing my traditions, things like that. And it's just like, and as a Native person, you sit back and you kind of laugh about this stuff. And you're like, well, whose culture have you stolen to get to where we're at? And who did you consult that, you're actually honoring us? Because that's always the first thing that comes out of their mouths when they're talking about, oh, we're honoring you and this and that. And yet, having been a person who graduated from Canandaigua Academy, went to the school where the Canandaigua Treaty was signed, I don't remember hearing anything about the Canandaigua Treaty. I don't remember being taught about that thing or that being like a huge sort of marker in the history and the context of the whole place. And it wasn't something that was really celebrated until years after when, I think the Nondigan started to be contacted by the school district and things like that and helped them with like some curriculum building and work and things like that. So, it's it's sort of a interesting thing, like what honoring looks like and what, being respected and appreciated actually looks like, and on whose terms. How do we honor these things? How do we feel honored? How do we, as Indigenous people, accept how we're viewed in the world today? And oftentimes we're left with, left sort of like not knowing, kind of how we're supposed to feel about these things, how we're supposed to share with other people. And, I think that one of the things that I've been trying to do again with this podcast is to educate our own people. I think a large part of my audience for the podcast are Indigenous people, Native peoples. One of my more successful podcasts, I think, that we've had has been the story around Handsome Lake, Skenyadayo, and talking about him. And it came to me that, I was doing a language class with Jamie Jacobs, Tonawanda Seneca. He works at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. And he was doing some language work over at Ganondigan with myself and the rest of the staff. And he kind of flashed like something up on his iPad really quickly. And it was like a family tree. And it was this family tree of Handsome Lake, And all of a sudden, it really clicked with me that, like, oh, this is like a real person. This was like a guy, And it wasn't so much like the guy that, like, you hear about in Longhouse, And he kind of seemed like this mythical kind of creature or whatever else. So it led me to like want to like investigate it a little bit further and know more, and then learn more about like that he's Corn Planter's half brother and things like that. And there's this whole sort of history, and all of this stuff happened like right down here in Ohio, just kind of south of here. And having grown up around here, I didn't really know a lot about that history and that background. And one of the advantages to working with Jamie was that he can tell you the story both from like the language aspect of it all, but also the cultural aspect and the historical aspect of it, because he's a historian himself. And so, again, I was able to sit there like a little kid and basically using Jamie as like my elder, even though he's younger than me, and to learn from him, and to spend the time and really kind of sit and talk with him. And really learn more about the history and sort of the story of like who Handsome Lake was. He was an alcoholic, and he was a warrior class type of person, and like, you always hear these stories about this trope of him being an alcoholic, but then you think about it and you're like, oh, well, part of this is like, this guy was like self-medicating. He went from a time of like being out on the warrior's path, killing people, different things, growing up in the warrior class, to now being like kind of cornered and like stuck on these small reservations, living in like single family dwellings and things like that. He was basically self-medicating and basically trying to recover from the fact that like, oh my God, I went from a time of like living free and living in a large, longhouse and community, and all of a sudden like everything's taken away and now we're living on these little postage stamps. So, it was amazing to like be able to learn all these things. And then later on, we started to talk about the Gaiweo, and his message and his prophecy and things like that. And we're day 2 into the prophecy, and there's actually 2 more days that we have to talk about. And I'm on a parental leave at the moment. We just recently had a little one, and so I'm home for the next 12 weeks. And so we're on a little bit of a brief pause, but we will get back to the Gaiweo with Jamie. And it's been amazing the reach that this thing has had. We've had communities from, maybe Akwesasne and Benuage, different territories and things like that, where they don't really believe in the Gaiweo. They don't really have that sort of connection to the Gaiweo that we do maybe down here. And, and that's okay. But our idea and our thought process around presenting information was to present it in a way that like, you can go and here's what we know about it, here's what we're going to share about it, here's what the language says, so that there's no misconstrued sort of ideas around it, because sometimes often people hear about the Gaiweo and they hear, oh, it's too church, or it's been influenced by, the Quakers and things like that. And Jamie's able to be patient with me, asking a bunch of dumb questions, and kind of, patiently explain, where some of this stuff could be lost in translation or could be kind of confused or lost and things like that. And, I think it's been very impactful for a lot of people. I've gotten, messages and people reaching out to me from these other territories who had disputed or didn't really, want to believe in, the Gaiweo. And I've even had people who were, regular preachers and other people who have, been active in and around the Longhouse and stuff like that reach out and say things to me that, oh, I didn't know that, or wow, I hadn't heard that version, or I hadn't, I didn't remember all that stuff. And so this being sort of a teaching tool and something that has been useful for other people has been amazing, and the responses has been really overwhelming in a lot of ways. It's been overwhelmingly positive, and I think that good, bad, or indifferent, however you want to feel around the Gaiweo, and if you're a Great Law believer, or if you're a Gaiweo believer, all of these messages are really essentially ideas and conversations and ways to like kind of save ourselves and save and retain who we are as a people and what we have left of our culture. And we have to get back to another place and another opportunity to like have this sort of like broader reach where we can all kind of like tap into something again and have some sort of a message that's going to resonate with all of us. We sit back and we watch all of the things that are happening around our communities and things like that, our territories. But even abroad, right now, I wasn't really wanting to kind of broach this too much, but, the Israel and Hamas sort of situation that's happening over in Palestine right now. When I was with the Iroquois Nationals, we had the opportunity to travel to Israel, and it was very complicated, to say the least. We were advised not to go there. We had groups that were Palestinian groups that didn't believe that we should go there. There was a lot of sort of political backlash that we shouldn't go there, and there was a lot of stuff that was happening that summer where there was bombs and missiles and things like that going on. And we were essentially told by the Grand Council that we shouldn't go. The Iroquois Nationals are sanctioned by the Grand Council, and that we shouldn't go to this thing. It's a dangerous place. We can't take 25 of our best men to go there. But they were hosting the World Lacrosse Championships, and they were hosting and playing our game, our medicine game, in Israel. And I felt it was important that we go there. I had been a part of the 2010 team that wasn't able to travel to England because of our passport issue. Israel was willing to recognize our passports. We were able to travel on our Haudenosaunee passports. And, I thought that there were some messages that we could use from our culture that we could share over there that, maybe more people would want to understand and learn about us, And so the first thing I thought of was that, okay, they're playing a medicine game, which everybody is able to rattle off and say, oh, it's a medicine game, this and that. Well, what does that mean? It can be a healing thing. It can be used ceremonially for somebody, who may need, something taken care of for them. But also, it's something that could be used in place of war. It could be something that could be kind of, they could settle disputes and do it in this way. And so that was interesting to me to think about that. Here's all these different countries coming together in a place like Israel to play the game, our game, a game, home to, Turtle Island and originated by our people. And how amazing it is to be able to have the fact that, we're going to be a part of this thing at the world level. And the only indigenous people to be able to travel there. And so, when talking to these Palestinian people who were, I don't know how they got my phone number and whatever, but making idle threats and things like that, I had to explain to them that presence can be protest. As opposed to not going and not being present, then you're taking the indigenous person out of there. So then it's erasure again. And so I said, no, we have to go. We have to be there. And one of the ideas that came to me is something that you have here in the gift shop, is the dish with one spoon, and that concept that was an agreement amongst all of the Great Lakes tribes and the nations, and it's a wampum belt that represents the dish with one spoon, and it's a dish that we're all going to eat from, but we're going to use a spoon, and we're going to take from it what we need and leave enough for everybody else. And so when you think about that, there's some deeper, richer sort of context and some stories that kind of go along with that. It's sort of an environmental sort of, shout out, but it's also maybe even a shout out to maybe, people can all take from a place, Jerusalem. This is where three major religions sort of, have this holy, connection to, Islam, Christianity, and also Judaism. And is there enough there that everybody can take something from it, but leave enough for everybody else? And not realizing that this is a sort of a controversial conversation around two-party states and all those sort of things. But, when you look at, and having been to Israel, it was something to be, standing there at the Wailing Wall, and just kind of looking around and not really having a dog in the fight, because I didn't consider myself a Christian, I didn't consider myself a Jew or anything like that, but having my own spiritual connection to our own culture and ideas. What are they all over here fighting about, and yeah, it's a beautiful place, but man, it's hot and dusty and this and that and whatever, and I'm not trying to admonish or kind of speak badly or poorly of the place, but all of the bloodshed and all of the losses and things like that over a place that, if you could just find a way to come together and realize that, okay, if this is a holy and sacred place, then we should all have access to that. We should all be able to take something from this place and survive and help ourselves and see each other. And so part of my agreement to, bring the Iroquois Nationals over there was that we wanted to do some sort of a teach-in with these young people. And so they were able to find some Arab kids and some Israeli kids. And we were actually able to do a lacrosse clinic over at a football field that Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, has over there. He's pretty invested in Israel. And he had these football fields in the middle of nowhere, which is the most bizarre place. We're all of a sudden standing in this park at this football stadium in Israel and doing this lacrosse demonstration. But we talked about the dish with one spoon, and we talked about the coming together of the Confederacy and the ideas and these messages of peace and things like that. And, here we are, the heathens of the woods, and these wild savage Indians and things like that, coming with these messages of peace and these ancient old stories in this place that's pretty well written about and pretty well talked about, and the violence and sort of the atrocities that happen around a place that's very religiously significant. And, we were able to kind of share what we knew about, what we understood on Turtle Island and what we were able to pick up from there. And, I just think that there's so much about our culture that's beautiful and rich and important that we need to share out. And when I'm doing the podcast and when I'm sharing information that, kind of toes the line around, sacred stories or, texts and things like that, or, conversations and things like that, I make sure that I'm respectful of the people. And I make sure that I'm, checking in with myself. First of all, is this something I should be talking about? Is this something that's okay? But then also talking to people as well and asking them, like, what do you feel comfortable in talking about? Where do you want to go with this? How do you feel about talking about these sort of things? And, and really kind of leaving it up to them in a way as to like, okay, what do we present? What do we bring out? And how do we help share this information with people? And, so far it's been a pretty interesting project. It's been a lot of fun, and I think it's something that I would encourage more young people to get into. I think that it's another way for them to have connection, to be able to learn and do different things. And I just think that they can certainly probably do it better than I can. Maurice and I, we were kind of laughing and talking about just, we're both really learning and just kind of fumbling around and learning these things and whatever. And, probably some young kid's going to be able to come in and, just be much more tech savvy and good at this thing than we are. But I think just like being able to clear a path and provide that space and that opportunity, but also that encouragement that, there's a lot of important things that you can learn from having these things and these conversations, and, get out of the Snapchat world, get out of the, those kind of reels and things like that, the 12-second sort of, clickbait sort of things, but actually really spend time with each other, really spend time with people to learn more. I think that's what's, really important. And, I just feel like in the next year coming back, when I get back off of my leave, I've been doing a lot of research, I've been doing a lot of reading, I've been listening to a lot of other podcasts, and I've got a whole lineup and a whole sort of like, idea of thoughts and ideas and things like that I really want to touch on, and I feel like every day, I feel like I'm running out of time. I don't feel like I'm going to have enough time to sit down with all the people I want to sit down and talk to. There's a lot of elders that I'd love to, sit down and talk to and kind of get them to share some more information. I've got 3 guys that I'm going to sit down with, probably in the next couple of weeks here, and they're going to talk about the history and how a place like Ganondigan even happened. And it'd be great to be able to sit down and talk about that stuff. How do you carve out a space, an indigenous space within the New York State park system, and what's the significance of that, and how that's become such an educational tool and resource for a lot of different people. A person like Dennis Bowen, who sits in this community. We're going to be hosting here at the Seneca Nation the World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference, and I've been a part of the planning committee for that. And some of the things that I've been thinking about that conference is how can this be a resource for our community? Maybe we don't have as many incidents and situations around suicide, but there's been a lot of other high-risk behavior where we've lost a lot of our young people, we've lost a lot of our people in the community. And how do we learn from these things? What sort of resources, what sort of tools can we pick up from a suicide prevention conference? Because how do we, I think some of the opioid epidemic and some of the issues that we're facing that way, it's high-risk behavior that is, on par with maybe suicide and ideologies and things like that, and sort of these, bad feelings about themselves and things like that, or maybe loss of hope at times, And so my plan and my goal is to be able to talk to people and maybe share some more resources, share some more information, and share some stories, and talk to people who have, maybe had suicide ideations or had these, challenging, moments in their lives as to like, what stopped them, what kept them here, what were the things, and how do we share that with somebody else who could be having that same sort of feeling, that same sort of vibe, and maybe help bring them back and save them, and help them to maybe realize that there's so much beauty on this place. I think I kind of glossed over a little bit of the edge of the woods, and it just sort of dawned on me that maybe I should talk a little bit about that, because there may be some people who aren't familiar with that. But it's part of a condolence, and condolence, of course, talks about, a passing of a person and things like that. But then it became sort of couched in the concept and the idea of raising a chief, or raising leadership within the traditional systems of the culture and things like that. And one of the first things that they do is that they wipe away the tears from somebody. They take a soft cloth and they wipe away the tears. And when you're grieving, when you're crying, when you're in a hard time and you're having difficulties and things like that, maybe it's you've kind of lost sight of the world around you, the beauty and things like that of the world around you. And so to be able to present the edge of the woods and to wipe away the tears so that you can now see clearly and see all the beauty of the world, maybe that's something that'll be hopeful for you. And just for the time that you're together with the people that you're with, and again, this is part of that traditional protocol and that greeting and things like that. So hopefully stick with me. I'm going to make this, it's going to work, I promise. And then the next thing that you want to do is acknowledge the fact that, this person, again, is going through a hard time. They're struggling, they're grieving. And so there could be, a blockage that they have, and maybe they're sick of hearing people telling them it's going to be okay, and they've lost somebody that was very near and dear to them and important to them. And, so they can't hear anymore. They're sick of hearing the outside and things like that. And so what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll clear out their ears. So that way they're able to now hear the beauty of the wind and hear the birds and things like that, and hear, the gentle breezes and the sounds in and around us and things. And hopefully it'll uplift their spirits for that time that we're together, and maybe it's just for that day or whatever that is. And then finally, again, while you're in grieving and while you're in loss and things like that, you have this blockage in your throat and you're not able to speak and convey your message so clearly. And so we're going to offer you a cool drink of water or something like that to kind of unstop that blockage and get that pathway cleared for you. And so then that way you can then communicate again, what the issues may be and what the challenges may be. And so this act of reciprocity, of like wiping away these things and kind of clearing these blockages and things like that, then puts this person back to being a whole person, and now they're fit to welcome them into the community. And we've been doing a camp for young kids up at Ganondigan the last couple of years. And we put them through the ceremony of this Edge of the Woods. And we want to empower our young people to realize and recognize that this is a traditional way of greeting people, that they can welcome people and they can now be the teachers. But also we want to clear all of these other issues and challenges away from them so that now they're able to receive messages, receive teachings and things like that. We've done archery with these kids, we've done hiking, we did kayaking, we did pottery making, we did treaty belt, teach-ins and things like that. So really kind of this Edge of the Woods can have a number of different contexts where it can kind of be used in a way that it can help people, who've been grieving or going through hard times and things like that. And we think that, for part of the suicide prevention conference, we're going to put people through this Edge of the Woods because some of them have lost people to suicide. People have been grieving. People have been having challenges. People have been going through hard times. And we all kind of come from that old school mentality of like, suck it up, tough it out, walk it off, whatever, you'll get over it, just kind of work it through and whatever. But I think it really needs to be somebody being intentional about recognizing them as a person, recognizing their pain and trying to be helpful in terms of like this caring touch, this caring, loving touch, and really wanting to, help this person through this difficulty that they may be experiencing at the time. And, so I think that these are things that are good practices. And, I just feel like I've been very fortunate to be able to have the experiences that I've had, being around the teachers that I've had, and now having a platform where I can actually share some of this stuff out. And also, humble myself to the point that sit there and, ask questions and have somebody teach me. I don't have to be the expert. I can kind of be the fly on the wall or sort of that facilitator of a conversation. And, and that's really kind of my goal and my aim for the podcast is like, how do we share more of our information? How do we share more of our stories? How do we clear the air? If there's a lost in translation issue, then how do I find somebody that can, understand the language and can translate it into a way into a context that we can all understand and that we can all kind of help each other out. And, it's been a fun project. It's not something that I make money at. I don't get paid for it. It's part of something that I just brought as part of my job, And it's been something that's been really cool for me. And I've been really appreciative of the fact that people have gotten something out of it. And even just a simple text message or a Facebook Messenger or a post or whatever that is. People sharing, the podcast out when I post them and things like that. And people telling other people, hey, you got to listen to this, And one of the funniest, I guess, sort of things that's come of this was I was speaking to a group of people and just sitting at a round table with some people, and I thought I kind of knew everybody at the table, and then all of a sudden this one woman looked over at me and she goes, "You sound familiar. do you have a podcast? I was like, that was the first time I was ever recognized for my voice as opposed to like my actual face. And I was like, oh, all right. So I guess, I've always told people I have a face for radio. So, it's something that, to be able to have people recognize me for my voice, I think that's some kind of a cool thing. So I certainly appreciate that. And, it's been a lot of fun, being a part of this process so far. And, I'm always looking for more stories, so recommendations and things like that, or if there's somebody that, I should be, talking to or I should be reaching out to and speaking to, like I'm an email away, I'm a Facebook message away. Would love to have somebody on. I'd love to come and sit with you. The cool thing is I've got a bunch of equipment that I can travel with. So I've got the ability to kind of go live on the scene and things like that. I can take my podcast equipment with me. How I got the equipment was through a grant at Cornell University when I was working at Cornell. So shout out to the Office Engagement Initiatives at Cornell University. I was able to buy the equipment that I have now. It's a few years old, but so it's already like a dinosaur in a lot of people's minds. But it works for my purposes, and it's great. And also I got to shout out, my editor, F. Paul Yorio. He's a non-native guy, but he's pretty cool. He kind of gets it when we're talking about things. And it's led me to go from having, just a simple podcast to now doing actually more production and actually making more videos and things like that and trying to do some visual representations of the culture. And so it's really helped me kind of spread my artistic wings in these ways and my creative wings, I guess. I don't really consider myself an artist. That's my father, it's another guy. But I really do appreciate the opportunity to be able to share our stories visually, but really trying to do it from the standpoint of like an indigenous lens, because oftentimes when you see these things or you have these stories and these things out there, there's oftentimes not a lot of indigenous sort of, people operating and doing all the things, and because I'm, kind of a fledgling sort of production company myself, I'm doing everything, I'm running the camera and kind of holding a boom mic and doing whatever it is and, just trying to be as much a part of the whole thing as I can to try to pull off whatever it is that I'm trying to do. But having a great editor and having somebody that's sort of a voice of reason has been something that's been helpful for me. And so F. Paul has been my wingman, and he's been a voice of reason for me at different times. And fortunately, I haven't put us in too many awkward situations. So we've had some pretty good success, and we've really been enjoying the time of the work and things like that we're doing. So I think that's a good place to stop there, but I will open it up to questions if there's any questions for the people in the audience here, but also if there's anybody on Zoom who's actually zoomed in. We do have a moderator here. So, but again, Yahweh, for listening to me and taking some time out of your evening tonight to sit in on this and tune into the Original People's Podcast. It's on Spotify. I believe we're also on Apple Podcasts. You can find us there. So, any questions in the room? Nothing yet? Okay, well, it looks like there's a few people that have zoomed in, so that's cool. I appreciate those people. Oh, I got a message from somebody saying that I should reach out to somebody. So, cool. All right. The power of social media and the interwebs. And again, I want to thank the staff here, Lisa, Jonathan, Hayden Haynes, for helping set this up, Maurice for helping with the live link, and this is going to be recorded, and I have the honor and I'm the first one of this whole lecture series. It's actually going to go up on YouTube. So again, forgive me. I've said it before. I have a face for radio. So if I'm a little too greasy and shiny, maybe this is like that baloney face in me. I think there's a show that's out on Netflix right now called Fry Bread Face in Me. Well, I can be baloney face in me because I'm a little probably greasy and hot. A little greasy and hot up here on the on the mic. But and also, I got to say, shout out to the museum here for what a setup. I mean, I get to hide behind this cool podium and things like that, and feel very dignitary-like. So it's pretty awesome. But with that, I will say Nyahweh for everybody who's attended, and hopefully you'll find me online. I'm pretty easy to track down. But again, the Original People's Podcast, and also I work at Ganondagan State Historic Site. I'm the cultural liaison there. And I really want to thank them as well for the opportunity to be doing the work that I'm doing and to continue to tell our stories. So with that, Yahweh, Daniel.